Welcome to another episode of the AppSec Insiders Podcast. This is a show where we discuss the hottest topics and latest trends in application and cloud security and tell you what you need to know. For those who don't know who we are all software developers, white hat hackers, and code security experts. And when we're not recording the podcast, we help organizations of all sizes with their cybersecurity needs. If you're an AppSec professional looking for an opportunity to work with some of the best in the industry, or a developer with an interest in cybersecurity, be sure to check out our careers page at forwardsecurity.com/careers. We would greatly appreciate if you'd subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to the show, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at Forward Security. Links are in the show notes. And in today's episode, we'll be wrapping up our discussion on ASVS, or the Application Security Verification Standard. I'm joined today by Iman. Say hi.
Yep, nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, there he is. The humble man himself,
Hi,
who has contributed a lot to ASVS. If you look through some of their contribution thanks notes and their issue tracking, he's added items, edited items. He's a big part of that system now. And we've gone through. Yeah, did you want to say something?
Not a big part, but I'm helping them. I'm one of the collaborators now.
Yeah, definitely collaborator. So last time, what did we talked? We have covered the first 8 topics, and now we're going to try to wrap up the last 5, starting at number 9. I think we're going to start with TLS, and TLS is a really short one. There's only 8, 9 verifications. Do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about this. TLS is an interesting one. Usually, it's an easy category to test. We have a tool, we call it SSLIs. It's an open source tool, and you can just install it and run it against any server that you have. And having a proper configuration for your TLS is very important. And that tool kind of, there are some famous vulnerabilities for TLS, such as Heartbleed and other stuff. The tool can find them, but usually nowadays you don't find the vulnerabilities. But the other thing that the tool finds, this SSLIs, is that it finds any misconfiguration in the TLS. For example, one of the most common issue that I see is that right now, based on, I believe, FIPS, TLS 1.2 is a secure protocol, and anything other than that, 1.0, 1.1 should be rejected. And there is a common pattern that I see between customers that they don't reject TLS 1.0 and 1.1. And what can happen is that if we have a sophisticated attacker, they can run a man-in-the-middle attack. And that is something that we should take care of that. Other than that, I can see that people, they're not using a proper cipher suite, and they allow deprecated cipher suite, they accept them. And cipher suites are sets of instructions that enable secure network connection through TLS. And usually we have SSL and TLS. In the past, we were calling it SSL, and now it is kind of deprecated, and we have TLS, and TLS 1.2 and 1.3 are the ones that we suggest to go with. And yeah, that's an easy to test thing, and category wise. And other than that, here, one day maybe I submit an issue for ASVS that OCSP, I kind of I don't believe it's really a security issue. I'm talking about a 924 and online certificate status protocol. But yeah, we should protocol stapling. Sorry. I believe I need to create an issue for ASVS. But yeah, in general, what do you think about this category, Josh?
Yeah, I completely agree. Most of it you can verify using SSLIs. And I agree. OCSP stapling, most people that we look at don't actually use it, and the risk is really quite low. Someone would have to steal your certificate, and it has to have been after you revoke it, the browsers that you use have to not be able to access the server that checks the veracity of the certificate. So there's a lot that, I mean, at the very least, maybe it should be moved to L3 or something. But I just wanted to add a quick note about server suites or Cypher suites. I think it's very interesting. It's a very interesting idea that, because every browser is different, every computer is different, every server is different. We have these sets of Cypher suites because not every server is capable of talking in the same encryption language as every browser and every operating system, etc. So that's why they have these suites, which is just a big array, a big list of different ciphers that they offer. And so you want to try to limit those to the most secure that you can. Generally speaking, anything that's using nowadays, if it's using GCM, it's probably a later one. Yeah, okay, so that's it for communication.
But in general, like the other thing that, but one more thing is that we should always use TLS, no matter what. Like, is it like an inside? Like, for example, some people I've seen that they're using Kubernetes clusters, and they're not using TLS for like communication between pods actually, and I wouldn't suggest that. And I can get it why, because sometimes handling those certificates manually is an issue in Kubernetes, but if they use like a service mesh, such as Istio, I believe that it's gonna solve their problem. But this is a common issue that I see, like for the backend communications, people, they tend to not to use TLS.
That's right, yeah, between services,
backend to backend, not front end to backend.
Because if an
behind
attacker,
the firewall.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Because in the backend, if an attacker is able to get a virtual machine stood up inside of your network, it can pretend to be any other machine in that network. So this is why you have mutual TLS between your services. But I think we should move on in order to make use of the time. So let's talk about malicious code verification. And a lot of this has to do with, I think, let me just double check. Yeah, so this is like, it's kind of also a very short one. I think there's only 9 or 10 of these. So make sure you're using a SAST static scanner. It's about stuff that's inside of your, make sure that your dependencies don't have any phone home code in it, and make sure that you're checking the integrity of your dependencies, like using checksums, and also make sure that you don't have debugging flags turned on in your source code, things like that. It's anywhere where there could be intentionally malicious code added either to your code or to a dependency.
And this is something that is important. Sometimes nowadays people, they tend to use open source libraries a lot, and even I've seen a Medium article that the guy created, like, it was a research project though. The guy created a library, an npm package that was for like making the logs more beautiful in console log for browsers. And then the guy started to go over like 1000 npm packages and start to edit the npm package files and pushed it. And I believe like out of 1000, like 30-40 npm packages, like I'm talking about like top 1000 npm packages. And he was able to push his logging library into those 40 packages, and that code, the thing that code was doing was extracting all credit card information. And it seems he was doing that. It seems he was able to execute his code on like a bunch of top 1000 Alexa websites in the world
Yeah,
through
right.
those infected npm packages. And that is something important.
Wow.
When we use those stuff, when we use any libraries, we should always be aware that we should have SCA to check for check vulnerabilities and all this stuff. But in general, this category has other stuff also. And the other one is like verify that the application doesn't ask for unnecessary or excessive permissions
Yeah.
that are related to privacy. And recently I've created an issue on ASVS, and I believe we're gonna create a new thing, a new requirement for that. But it's something. There's a header called feature policy, and if we use feature policy, we let the browser know that these are all the permissions that we need. If later on an attacker injects an XSS and wants to get the camera's access, then the browser knows that it shouldn't do that actually. Because of that, it's not gonna allow the malicious code to be executed. In general, other than that, I believe for binaries, and also there are some other stuff. Like I've seen that people they don't obfuscate their JavaScript code, they don't minify their JavaScript code, and even though it's not a big risk, but when you can obfuscate for free, why you don't do that? Because if the attacker sees your unobfuscated code, then you might put some, I don't know, some sensitive information there, or they can easily do the reverse engineering. Also, it applies to binaries. I've seen I've tested some application that they're using. There are some libraries that you can, or frameworks that you can utilize to develop Mac and Windows binaries using HTML and JavaScript. And there are many of them, but I've seen situation that the people that they use those frameworks, they're not utilizing code obfuscation. And also for Windows binaries, if we have a sensitive applications, then we need to protect that against threat injection, process injection, anything like injection wise, because if we allow an attacker to inject a thread inside an application, then the malicious threat can have the application context and can kind of crack the app, and it could lead to like serious situation. But in general, like ASVS is more for web application. Yeah, that's the other thing that I see is 10.3.3, and we're talking about like ASVS version 4 here. Version 5 is kind of there is a major rework on version 5. But for this item, I've seen people that they're using AWS environment, and they create some S3 buckets, and they put their source code, like I don't know, JavaScript source code, React source code, on their S3 buckets, and in their S3 buckets. And the thing is that later, and they attach kind of their relate subdomain to that source code. And later on, an administrator comes and remove that bucket, and now it's still the subdomain is connected to that bucket. But the problem is that someone else can come and create the same bucket name, and now they can run the subdomain takeover attack easily. And usually it's an easy bug bounty thing. Like they give you like, I don't know, a few $1,000 for finding this, and but it can be serious. It can be serious, and we have an item in this category to avoid this actually. Yeah, is there anything that we can add?
Yeah, is that do you know if that's going to be part of ASVS 5, that one?
It is a part of ASVS 4 as well. It's 10.3.3 actually.
Do you know if it will be a part of ASVS 5?
I believe so. Yeah, we should keep it out. But
Yeah.
one in this item is talking about like buckets,
Mhm.
and in general, like subdomain takeover is kind of dangerous. Other than that, like we have integrity protection here, Jared. We didn't talk about that. Maybe you can let us know what is SRI.
Yeah,
We
sure.
talk about this.
So yeah, there's a couple things. So you can check for the integrity of your third-party dependencies on the front end and on the back end. So on the front end, let's say that you're loading scripts from some CDN somewhere. It can be internal in your server, but a lot of the times it's external. You're loading them from Google CDN or from somewhere like that. Well, the browser has a built-in attribute for script tags. It's called integrity. And in integrity, what you do is you add a hash of the file. So whatever JavaScript file it is that you're bringing in, you get the SHA-3 hash of that, you add it to the integrity attribute. And what the browser will do is if there's ever a modification to that file, the checksum won't match what you have manually added to that attribute. And it will refuse to load that JavaScript file. Right. There's also using another header. I think it's the content security policy or reporting. So that covers failures, or that covers when somebody tries to do something that doesn't go by the content security policy, but it also works for these attributes as well. So basically, you can use that to report to you when that happens, so that you're aware when a JavaScript file is loading on your web page because the checksum doesn't match anymore. And the reason we do that is to make sure that if the dependencies upon which we depend get breached and their code changes on their servers, we don't want it to affect our application. And the same can be said for server-side stuff. So for instance, if you're using NPM to pull in packages, one of the things you can do is have a script that checks for the pre-calculated hashes. So the first time you run through it, you will pre-calculate the hashes, and then you'll, in the future, check that all the hashes are correct. The other thing you could do is check the hash against what's been published on NPM. But then there's a question of, if somebody is able to take over a repo, can they not also just change what gets published to NPM? So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem there. But I think for the sake of time, we should move on to business logic, because I feel we've covered a good chunk of malicious code verification. And the business logic section, which is category 11, is also quite short. This one's even shorter. I think it's only 7 items. This is mostly about, does your application work in a way that a human would use it? So it's a lot of anti-automation stuff. Make sure that the business logic makes sense for what a human's going to do. So things shouldn't happen in an inhumanly small amount of time. I shouldn't be able to do, 100 transactions in a couple seconds. And also I shouldn't be able to step over processes. So like if in order to create a bank account, or if in order to withdraw from a bank account, I first have to create a bank account in your banking app, I shouldn't be able to do those in the reverse order, right? Or if in order to log in, I need to first answer some security questions, I shouldn't be able to bypass that. I shouldn't be able to then begin using the app without having completed the previous steps. And there's also some interesting ones here about time of check, time of use. So these are sort of race conditions in your application, but it's mostly about anti-automation in general.
Yeah. I mean, anti-automation and other business logic issues, like, for example, I don't know, I remember when I was in Bachelor, we had a website that we could go there and buy some lunch or dinner for ourselves for like university.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a logic issue there that we could like just pay once and get like 10 meals. And by changing the sequence of the calls and all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, there's There's a
That's
rehearsal
all.
space. So I play music, and there's a space around me that does rehearsals where you can go with a band, and they have all the drums and the amps and stuff set up for you. You can be loud in there. And on their website, they didn't allow you to book until 11 o'clock because then they can't book that remaining hour because they closed at midnight. But you could go in, and by doing the last step first, you could set the time that you wanted it to go to. And we didn't want to pay for that extra hour. We were always going to leave at 11. We're 9-to-5ers, so we would use that quite a bit.
That's and the other thing that I see commonly, like it's about like lack of rate limiting, is that password reset. Usually, everyone, they're protecting themselves against brute force and many other rate limiting stuff. But for password reset, people, they forgot to rate limit that. What can an attacker do is that they can run a mail bomb attack using password reset, and it could lead to a denial of service. If, for example, you're using SendGrid as a service, maybe they ban your account, or Gmail start to blacklist your mail server, all those stuff. But in general, that's the other thing that I see. This is a common pattern. And for race conditions are very interesting, because kind of they're hard to find. But one of the common patterns that I see is that anywhere that they accept like coupons, gift card, just check the race condition scenario. Maybe they're vulnerable to that. For example, there was a case that there was like a commercial store, and you were able to use a $10 coupon and redeem that for 5 times instead of just 1 time, because there are some tools that are I believe one of them is like Turbo Intruder. I should double check that. But you could use them and then send a lot of requests, like 100 requests at the same time, and because there is no like block or mutual exclusion, mutex, then they're gonna be vulnerable to this.
Right.
But in general, like because we don't have a lot of time and we want to wrap it up, let's talk about like category 12, Jared.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and maybe we'll end on category 12, because then 13 and 14 are quite large, and that can be
maybe that's another thing.
So category 12, this is files and resources. So this is a fun category to test for, because this is a lot about file uploads. And file uploads are one of the best ways to get remote code execution, or to access source code, things like that. So a lot of this has to do with make sure that your uploads are limiting file size and checking file types, not just by extensions, but using file signatures or magic numbers, right? So every file has a header, which is just the first few bytes of that file. And there's a big dictionary that most computers have that tells it what those bytes, what kind of file those bytes are. So let's say you see something that's like the first few bytes are F78E0202. Okay. And that always means PDF. I've made up those bytes, but let's say, you can, there's actually, it's on Wikipedia. There's a table of them you can find. So the application, your computer knows that this is a PDF file, even if you put .jpeg at the end. There might be some convenience built into the operating system that if you put .jpeg, it'll try to open it up in an image viewing app for you, because it assumes, users want that level of control. But the computer knows that it's not a JPEG. It knows that it's a PDF, and it's because of those headers, those file signatures or magic numbers. And so we should be checking for that instead of just the extension, making sure that files are of a certain size, that zip files, before you unzip them, that you first list the archive and make sure that it isn't, a zip bomb full of humongous files or dozens of files, or files using zip slip, which allow overwriting of files in directories outside of the ones you've named. And then there's other verifications here about not using the metadata. in dangerous ways. So sometimes, your application might take like the location that a photo was shot and add that to, include that in the on the page somewhere, and then you can have XSS or I'm trying to think of other scenarios that I've seen, but here it specifically says OS command injection. I mean, I imagine you could take the dimensions of the metadata, like from the metadata, and put it into some, maybe image magic or something like that, and run some command. And that metadata actually can be controlled by an attacker. And instead of having dimensions, it can have, other arguments that you've passed now to your image magic new process that you spawned. And what else does it talk about? Yeah.
I mean, even like we can talk about like SSRF in category 13, but here it talks about SSRF also.
Yeah.
Because you remember, like, we can upload some HTML file, and then sometimes there's some parsers in the backend that if they see like any URLs, they're gonna send a request to that URL. It could lead to an SSRF, server-side request forgery. And the other thing is that did we talk about like command injection? Sometimes like
we talked about it
files
in a previous episode.
Yeah, but I mean, exactly. Like, sometimes when we upload for some files, it could lead to command injection because because of it's more logical issue. But other than that, like the other thing that I kind of propose for this is like pixel flooding attack. There were no ASVS item for that.
What is that? I'm not familiar with that.
And you can create an image file, this very small image file with like a huge number of pixels, and and when the parser wants to parse them,
interesting.
Not parser, when when they want to render that, it's gonna crash the backend if they want to kind of process that file.
That's so sneaky.
And other than that, like Jared has talked about like that zip sleep attack, but the other thing that I proposed was like the symlink attack. It was like GitLab was vulnerable to this one. Exactly. You can put a symlink in a zip file, and sometimes when the backend extracts that, it's gonna show you the file that the backend has. For example, etc pass wd, and that's another tricky attack.
Another thing here, there's some directory traversal stuff in here, and it says stuff like if your server is serving files instead of having a routing table or something like that, make sure that the server won't serve files that aren't files that you want to be served. Like, for instance, don't allow it to serve .backup files or .zip files. If you have a PHP server, it should only be serving PHP files. And if you want it to serve, like, I shouldn't be able to browse your .git folder, which is something that I surprisingly see quite commonly in these types of setups, because then I can steal your source code. What else? Let's see. There's a couple other things in here, but I mean, I don't want to just read it out for everybody, but I think we've covered, I think, the spirit of this.
Section. I mean, let's keep the other two categories for another session. And thank you very much, guys. And this concludes this episode of our AppSec Insiders podcast. We hope you have enjoyed learning about like OS ASVS. Remember to tune in next time as we delve deeper into the world of application and cloud security and explore new ways to protect our digital assets. Also, we appreciate your support and engagement. If you have anything in your mind, please reach out to us at AppSec Insiders at forwardsecurity.com. Our Twitter handle is @FWD_SEC. And please feel free to follow Forward Security on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter. And please also consider subscribing to our podcast. Have a good one.
Way to go.
Thank you.